The Arizona dust clung to Clara Mae's shoulders, like the burden of 3 long years, as she studied the cracked ground around her well. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Out here, water was dearer than gold, and the dwindling in her tanks forced cruel choices between parched cattle and wilting crops. Her rough hands gripped the pump handle, each pull yielding less, while the pitiless sun scorched her back. The ranch, her late husband carved from grit and faith, now leaned on her strength alone, and the small arms of her 7-year-old boy, Eli Kane. Across the wavering horizon, a solitary rider appeared, man and horse shimmering like a mirage in the heat. As the stranger neared, Clara's hand reached the rifle by the well, her nerves sharpened by run-ins with Silas Boone's men, who came sniffing for her water rights. The rider's horse staggered spent from hard miles. "Water for my horse," the man called, voice rasped by trail dust stopping well short of her aim. His weather-beaten face spoke only of fatigue, though his eyes read the ranch with the cool measure of someone who knew sagging fences and half-starved cattle. Coulter Hayes hadn't meant to stop at this worn-down homestead, but desperation bends a man's trail, like floodwater bends a canyon. His last coin had gone to bullets 3 towns back. His name carried weight enough to close doors in the last settlement. "My horse needs water more than I need your blessing, ma'am," Coulter added when she kept her rifle leveled. He tipped his hat back just enough to show eyes that had weathered violence and could recognize her fierce resolve. Clara studied him with the guarded instinct of a woman long practiced at reading men's intent. It was his horse that swayed her more than his words. No man looking for trouble would ride a beast near to breaking. "Water troughs behind the barn," she said at last, gun still in hand, but no longer pointed at his chest. "1 bucket for the horse, then you move on. We don't keep much to spare for drifters." From the shade of a cottonwood, Eli crept out, ignoring his mother's warnings, as curiosity burned brighter. His small boots stirred dust as he edged close, hiding half behind Clara's skirt, but peeking wide-eyed at the tall rider. "Your boy Coulter?" asked, giving Eli a nod, plain respectful, without false cheer. The simple recognition softened Clara's face by a shade. Leading his horse to the trough, Coulter's eyes swept the place, fences, split shingles, missing cattle thin. Yet all bore the marks of care despite short means. "Your north fence has 3 breaks," he said easily. "Boone's longhorns are slipping through. His foreman's been nudging your markers again. Looks like you're losing near 20 acres. Clara stiffened at the man's knowledge of her private war with the cattle baron. "You know Silas Boone?" she asked sharply, trailing him at a wary distance while Eli stooped for rocks along the path. "Worked one of his drives up to Kansas City 2 seasons back," Coulter answered, letting his horse drink slow and careful. "Quit when he told the hands to poison a family's well. That was enough for me." The weight of his words settled between them, a truth about Boone's ruthlessness and Coulter's line he would not cross. Clara's grip eased on the rifle. Perhaps this was not a threat, but an ally. "I can mend that fence before sundown," Coulter offered. His voice made clear it was no charity, just fair trade. Proper work for a proper meal. Eli tugged at her skirt, whispering loud enough to carry. "Ma, we still got beans in that rabbit from yesterday. Fence needs fixing bad, or we'll lose more calves." Clara's caution wrestled with necessity, but necessity won. "Fix the north fence and there's supper waiting," she said firmly. "One night's work, one night's food. Shelter's in the barn, nothing more." "Yes, ma'am," Coulter answered, neither eager nor put out. He fetched a worn saddlebag of tools and set off without another word. Clara felt Eli's small hand slip into hers as they watched him go. "He's got sad eyes," Ma the boy murmured, with a child's plain truth. Like that old wolf we saw last winter, hungry, but not mean. By sundown, Coulter had mended all 3 breaks, setting new posts, and strengthening the line beyond her ask. His steady labor spoke of long years with cattle and wire, every strike clean, every pull sure. The promised meal waited on the porch, rabbit stew stretched with garden vegetables, cornbread from scant flour, and coffee brewed strong to hide its weakness. Clara served without fuss, but with the quiet dignity that marked everything she did. Eli Kane peppered Coulter Hayes with questions between eager spoonfuls of stew, his curiosity bubbling over despite the sharp looks his mother sent his way. The boy hadn't seen many new faces since his father's death, especially not men who treated him with respect. "You ever ride the Chisholm Trail?" he asked, eyes wide, when Coulter mentioned the great cattle drives. "Pa always promised he'd show me those herds someday," Eli went on, voice shining with wonder. "Said there'd be thousands of longhorns stretching farther than you could see." A shadow crossed Clara Mae's face at that memories of promises her husband could never keep. Her spoon stilled grief, flashing for a heartbeat before she forced herself back to eating with quiet resolve. "The pump handle's splitting," Coulter remarked gently, after a silence, shifting the talk with careful kindness. "Saw it when I watered my horse. I could mend it tomorrow if you'll allow it." Before Clara could answer, hoofbeats sounded from the road. She was on her feet in an instant, rifle ready. Coulter's easy posture hardened, and without thinking he stepped in front of Eli, shielding the boy with the unconscious reflex of a fighting man. Out of the dusk rolled Virgil Tate's fine buggy, the banker's polished look almost laughable against the dust and grit. Beside him sat Silas Boone, massive in frame, his vest straining against his bulk-piercing misses. Mae Tate called his tone honeyed, but his eyes cold. "We were in the area, thought we'd check on how you're holding up." Boone's eyes went straight to Coulter, sizing him like a rancher weighing stock, deciding whether he was a threat or a tool. "Didn't know you'd taken on hired help, Widow Mae," he said, dragging out the title with deliberate weight. "Mr. Hayes is just passing through," Clara answered evenly, chin lifted in the quiet defiance Boone knew well. "Now what brings 2 important men to my porch after sundown?" Tate drew a folded paper from his vest, dangling it like bait. "Quarterly assessments due next week. Given your situation, I thought we might work out more reasonable terms." "My payment will be ready," Clara said firmly, knuckles white around the rifle, though her voice stayed steady. "On time. Same as always." Boone's voice oozed false sympathy. "No shame in admitting when you can't keep up, ma'am. My offer for your water rights still stands. Best way out of a hopeless spot." Eli appeared quietly in the doorway behind Coulter, face solemn, watching men whose threats he'd seen too often. Coulter shifted again, squarely between the boy and danger. Both Tate and Boone noticed. "Gentlemen," Clara cut in sharply, "it's late. We rise early for chores. I'll see you at the bank on payment day, Mr. Tate." The buggy rolled off, leaving a swirl of dust. Coulter caught the strain in Clara's shoulders, the way she masked it for her boy's sake. "I could stay on a spell," he offered low. "Pump won't mend itself, and your east fence is failing." One day turned into 3 weeks. Each morning, Coulter found a reason to remain a broken wagon axle ditches, needing to be cleared before the rain's leaks in the roof demanding repair. He moved through the chores with quiet competence, and Clara found fewer excuses to send him away. Eli flourished under Coulter's steady hand, learning to mend tack and work cattle, with all the seriousness of a boy trying to become a man too fast. The nightmares that once plagued him came less often now, replaced by a sense of safety that slowly settled back over the ranch. Sundays brought church at Gallows Reach, a duty Clara still observed, though the town's stares had grown colder, sharpened by Boone's whispers about her stubbornness and independence. That morning, eyes followed her with unusual interest as Eli walked proudly beside her in his brushed-up Sunday clothes. Reverend Amos Granger preached on Naomi's wisdom in accepting help after widowhood. His voice carried his glances at Clara's pew pointed. Pride that rejects support, he warned, endangers not only oneself, but the innocent in one's care. After the service, Deputy Clay Mercer approached stiff and uneasy, as if reciting someone else's words. "May there's been talk," he began awkwardly, eyes skittering away, "about the drifter staying out at your place. Mr. Hayes is working as my ranch hand," Clara said with measured dignity. But the whispers made clear the town had already judged otherwise, her choice now a matter of gossip and official notice alike. The marketplace was no kinder. Each trade of eggs for supplies came wrapped in stares and broken-off conversations. The sympathy once given a grieving widow had curdled into suspicion, stoked by Boone's hand and sharpened by Clara's refusal to bend. The sudden chill in town stood in stark contrast to the sympathy Clara Mae had first known after her husband's passing. "They fear a woman who stands on her own without begging," remarked, whispering Rose, stepping up to Clara's wagon with her usual bluntness. Despite the risk to her own reputation, the young native woman's friendship never wavered in a town that often looked at her with suspicion. Her quick fingers sifted through a basket of finely woven goods, choosing a watertight jug as she spoke low. "My brother Red Elk says your new hand rode with the hash knife outfit. Good men. Straight shooters. Folks who keep their word. In a place where a man's name often arrived before he did such news was worth more than coin." Clara accepted both the vessel and the truth behind it, with a nod, knowing the gift went far deeper than the item itself. Whispering Rose leaned closer. "They're spreading uglier talk at the saloon. Hank Doyle has been sniffing around asking about your ranch, your water, and this cowboy of yours. Doyle doesn't ask unless Silas Boone sends him." The mention of Doyle iced Clara's spine. That gunman's shadow meant Boone's fight had shifted from paper and money to the barrel of a gun. Her dark thoughts broke when Eli ran up, flushed with excitement from the blacksmith's shop. "Ma Buck Hanley says when I'm older, he'll take me on as an apprentice, teach me how to shoe horses just like he showed me last week." The glow in her boy's eyes gave Clara steel against the town's judgment. Eli's future was worth every battle, no matter the cost. That afternoon, Clara returned to the ranch to find Coulter Hayes bent over the irrigation gates, sleeves rolled high, muscles taut beneath scars that spoke of years with cattle and iron. "Town's buzzing," she said, without preamble, as she unloaded supplies. "Boone's hired Doyle. He's digging for answers about us, about you." At the name, Coulter's hands went still. He wiped the mud, slow and deliberate. "I know Doyle," he said, voice hard as stone. "If he's asking, it means trouble's coming." The unspoken weight between them carried more than rumor. It was a warning. His stay, once temporary, had quietly settled into something deeper, though neither dared name it. "You ought to know," Coulter added after a long pause. "I've crossed paths with men like him before. Nothing that had put the law on your doorstep, but enough for him to make this personal." The next morning, Eli came running from the north pasture, breathless panic in his voice. "Ma, Mr. Hayes, the markers, they're different." Clara and Coulter hurried after him to the boundary where heavy stones once set by survey had been dragged deep into her land. The theft carved away a wide swath of grazing ground, handing it neatly to Boone's ranch. "These were moved last night," Coulter muttered, crouching to study faint tracks. 3 men, at least. One's wearing spurs with notched rowels. Boone's foreman rides with those. From the tree line stepped Red Elk, silent as a shadow, his tracking skill legendary in the territory. He nodded to Clara, then bent low, eyes reading signs most would never see. "They came from the east," he reported. "Avoided your house. worked under cover of dark. One smoked American tobacco. One carried a Winchester. Eli watched in awe as Red Elk pieced together the story from scattered marks, admiration shining for the tracker, whose quiet strength reminded him of Coulter. "This creek bend belongs on your side," Red Elk said, pointing where the water curved. "But with the new line, the deepest pool falls to Boone. Your herd will have to cross his ground to drink. He'll bleed you with fees or break you outright." Clara's mind cut straight to the truth. No water meant no herd. No herd meant foreclosure when Virgil Tate's mortgage came due. "We'll need proof before they claim it's always been this way," she said, steady as steel. "Eli, fetch your father's survey maps." "Red Elk, will you testify if need be?" "I will," the tracker replied, rare emotion stirring in his voice. "My father helped survey this valley long before most settlers came. The land holds memory. I can speak for it." That evening, Coulter rode the boundaries, sketching maps, marking every stone Boone's men had moved. His careful work betrayed a discipline that spoke of soldiering, though he offered no explanation. When darkness fell, Clara found him checking her late husband's rifle, working the action with a calm that spoke not of upkeep, but of readiness. The truth needed no words. Danger was closing in, and both knew it. "We'll take turns keeping watch," Coulter Hayes said flatly, sliding cartridges into the rifle with a calm hand that came from long habit. "Boone's riders will be back, likely with Hank Doyle in tow. They'll want to make sure those stones stay put until the ink dries on a crooked claim." The county land office sat tucked inside Gallows Reach's courthouse, its shelves stacked with heavy ledgers mapping the land's shift from open range to fenced-off parcels. Behind the counter, Ephraim Doolin barely glanced up from his book when Clara Mae stepped in. His pen scratched on slow and deliberate before he finally drawled Mrs. May. "What brings you here?" "Your quarterly account with Virgil Tate isn't due till next week." Clara laid her late husband's deed and survey, maps on the counter, her tone all business, though she caught the curl of condescension in his voice. "I need these boundaries verified. The markers have been tampered with." For the briefest instant, unease flickered across Doolin's face before he masked it. "Boundary disputes go through Marshal Jed Rourke," he said smoothly, nudging the papers back without a look. "And for your information, Mr. Boone already submitted updated documentation yesterday. The timing confirmed what Clara suspected, Boone and the county men working hand in glove." "I'll see those papers," she demanded, voice steady as iron. With obvious reluctance, Doolin fetched a freshly inked map and rolled it out. The lines matched exactly what Coulter had found along the fence. At the bottom gleamed the territorial seal slapped over signatures that had clearly been added later. "This is a forgery," Clara said evenly, though her chest burned with fury. "The boundaries don't match the original survey when my husband purchased this land. Someone has doctored the records." Doolin shifted uncomfortably, but kept his loyalty plain. "The office has accepted the amendments as more accurate based on natural landmarks. Weather and wildlife can move markers, you understand." The excuse was as thin as creek water, but Clara had braced herself for it. "I'll need certified copies of both deeds, the original and this one. Marshal Rourke will have the truth in front of him when the matter's heard." That night, Coulter stepped through the swinging doors of the saloon, drawing quick stares from the men crowded around the bar. His presence stirred quiet talk, everyone curious about the drifter tied to the widow's ranch. He ordered whiskey with easy confidence and leaned against the counter watching the room without looking like he was. In the far corner sat Hank Doyle, his back to the wall, eyes cold and calculating. The gunman sized Coulter up with the patient stare of a predator measuring prey. "Heard you're working for the widow," a weathered ranch hand muttered nearby, breaking the taut silence. "Hard place to make a living with Boone sniffing after those water rights." Coulter gave nothing away, answering only with a shrug while quietly marking who in the room deferred to Doyle and who kept their distance. An hour later, Deputy Clay Mercer strode in his badge, drawing a sudden hush. His eyes landed on Coulter, weighing him like a man expecting trouble. "Mr. Hayes," he said, crossing to the bar with forced casualness. "Need a word about your employment. Routine matter, just paperwork for newcomers." Neither man was fooled. Still, Coulter nodded and followed him to a quieter corner, feeling Doyle's gaze track his every move. The gunman's watchful interest confirmed what Clara had warned questions were being asked, pressure building. Mercer's awkward queries revealed more than he meant to. An honest sort trapped, serving in a town where Boone's reach touched every office. His questions weren't about crimes, but about Coulter's history, his intentions, his place at Clara's side. "Mae has enough to shoulder without added trouble." The deputy finished carefully. "Certain men in this town take a mighty close interest in her affairs, and they don't take kindly to strangers meddling." The warning given Deputy Clay Mercer left the saloon, and Coulter Hayes sat turning the words over while finishing his whiskey, all under Hank Doyle's cold eyes from across the room. Boone's men were still playing the same game, turning the screws, waiting for Clara Mae to break. Outside, a commotion cut through the evening hum. A wagon had tipped near the general store, spilling crates and sacks into the dust. Among the scattered goods, Coulter saw Clara down on her knees, gathering what she could, while young Eli Kane fought to calm the spooked horse. The timing was too perfect. The spot too public, another staged humiliation meant to show the widow couldn't keep her place without a man's hand. Folks watched from porches and storefronts, some pitying, others smug, none moving to help. Coulter strode over at once. Doyle's sharp gaze followed from the doorway as Coulter righted the wagon with quick strength, keeping close to Clara and Eli as he gathered supplies. "Wheel pin's been tampered with," he muttered low. His practiced eye had spotted it right off. The accident in the busiest crossroads of town was no accident at all. From the trading post came Whispering Rose, swift and sure, scooping Clara's goods with steady hands. Moments later, her brother Red Elk stepped from between buildings, laying a calming touch on the trembling horse. Their loyalty, plain as day, stood tall against the town's growing hostility. Boone's men were asking about your west barn. Whispering Rose, whispered voice low so only Clara heard. How close it sits to the property line. Whether it's full of hay. A shiver colder than the autumn wind traced down Clara's spine. That barn held not just feed for winter, but nearly every tool she needed come spring. That night, Coulter insisted they check it. Clara came too, rifle in hand, her face set against the starlight. At first glance, nothing seemed touched, the old boards weathered, but sound padlock firm on the doors. Yet Coulter circled wide, senses pricked. He stopped suddenly. Smell that faint and sharp coal oil. He found rags soaked with it against the back wall hidden from the house. A candle half burned had been rigged to tip flame into the cloth while they slept. Clara's hands were steady as they pulled the trap apart, but moonlight caught the fear she buried under iron resolve. This was no longer pressure. It was open war. "They'll come again," Coulter said grimly as they carried the rags away. "Boone's done with tricks. Now he means to burn you out." They set a night watch, Coulter taking most of the hours despite Clara's protest. Eli wasn't told the truth, but he sensed the strain, the way both adults moved, sharper eyes always searching. 3 nights later, fire lit the horizon. Coulter caught it on his midnight patrol, the western fence line ablaze, flames racing through dry grass. Clara burst from the house, already clothed, rifle slung across her shoulder. Without a word, they followed the plan. Clara roused Eli and hurried him to the stone spring house, while Coulter fought the fire back with shovel and water. By dawn, smoke lay heavy over the land. They'd saved the buildings, but the pasture was gutted black earth, cutting off cattle from the water. Boone's men had chosen well, crippling her herd without striking her house. Days later, Gallows Reach swelled with people for court. Marshal Jed Rourke had ridden circuit into town, and word spread quick. Clara Mae's fight with Silas Boone was coming to a head. The courthouse benches filled with neighbors, the split of loyalty clear in where they sat. Boone's crowd heavy to the right. Clara's few allies gathered left. Boone swaggered to the front, his frame filling the room, dripping with gold watch chains and diamond pins. Just behind him sat Virgil Tate, neat as a banker's ledger, calm as though the verdict was already his. Their confidence said they believed the game was won, despite Rourke's hard reputation for fairness. When Clara entered, she walked with dignity, every eye following her down the aisle. The whispers didn't shake her spine. Her blue dress, neatly patched, though worn thin, spoke of hard times. Honestly endured no false display of poverty, no plea for pity, just quiet dignity. Coulter Hayes walked close behind watchful eyes, sweeping the crowd for danger, while young Eli Kane clutched the survey papers with the gravity of a soldier bearing dispatches. One face was missing Hank Doyle. His absence gnawed at Coulter's instincts for trouble, often lay where the gunman wasn't seen. Inside, Marshal Jed Rourke brought the court to order, with a briskness that brooked no games. This hearing will address the boundary dispute between Mrs. Clara Mae and Mr. Silas Boone, he announced, adjusting spectacles that magnified sharp measuring eyes. As complainant, Mrs. Mae will present first. Clara stepped forward, not with ease, but with the steel of necessity. She laid out her husband's original maps, each landmark carefully marked, each stone accounted for. These markers have not shifted since the territorial survey set them 7 years back, she stated evenly. Only after I refused to sell water rights did they move, reshaping my land into Boone's favor. Boone's hired attorney, fresh from the capital, and oiled in manner leapt up. Speculation and self-interest. The official records show the current markers are correct. Rourke's face stayed carved from granite as he compared both sets of papers, his methodical patience giving weight to every turn of a page. The court notes discrepancies between the original survey and the current filing, he said. Witnesses may shed light on this matter. When Red Elk strode forward, the room stirred. Many distrusted native testimony, yet his bearing, quiet, unflinching, silenced most objections. He raised his hand to swear, then spoke steady and clear. My father aided the first territorial survey. Our people kept record of these lands long before ink touched paper. The Creek Bend Boone now claims has always belonged to the Mae property. The lawyer sneered. And these oral tales outweigh proper documents of record. Red Elk's dark eyes held steady. Our stories outlast paper. The stones were set by those landmarks. I can show the drag marks in the soil, the signs of tampering to anyone who knows how to read the ground. Piece by piece, Boone's case cracked. Clara added evidence of the recent fires, tying them to Boone's pressure. Emboldened by her resolve, a handful of neighbors rose to tell what they had seen Boone's men skulking near the markers at night. Then, unexpectedly, Reverend Amos Granger requested to speak. His voice trembled as he confessed overhearing Boone's foreman bragging that the stones had been shifted to teach the widow her place. The gavel struck hard. Marshal Rourke's voice carried like thunder. This court finds proof of tampering. The original boundaries are hereby restored, and Mr. Boone will compensate Mrs. Mae for losses caused by the fire. Furthermore, Boone's massive hands clenched white on the table, fury burning in his eyes as Rourke listed penalties. The verdict was a rare victory for justice in a land where wealth often bent the law. but Clara knew the look Boone fixed on her. Paper rulings would not hold him. As they left, Coulter kept his eyes on the dispersing crowd. "We'd best be ready," he said low. Doyle wasn't in that room. Means he's setting the stage for Boone's next move. They wasted no time gathering what supplies they could and riding hard for home. Eli rode double with his mother, his excitement at the court win tempered by the grim watchfulness in both adults. Near sundown, vultures circled above the north pasture. Coulter veered that way, dread tightening his jaw. What they found stopped Clara cold, 3 head of cattle throats cut clean laid out along the disputed line. This wasn't rustling, Coulter said, crouching by the carcasses. The cuts were precise, almost ceremonial. This is Boone's warning, a message carved in blood for what happens when his word is defied. Clara's face stayed calm, though inside she knew the loss cut deeper than the hides on the ground. Boone's war had left the courthouse behind. Now it would be fought in fire, steel, and fear. Each slaughtered cow cut deep, not just in loss, but in timing. Winter loomed, and prices were high. It was a strike meant to cripple Clara Mae's chances before the cold set in. That night the house was barred tight, doors reinforced, and windows shuttered. Coulter Hayes moved the horses into the barn closest to the house, a precaution born of knowing Boone's men would come for what was most valuable. "You ought to take Eli and stay with the Whitakers until this blows over," Coulter urged, worry plain in his voice. This wasn't doubt in Clara's strength. It was the weight of knowing Silas Boone never stopped once blood was drawn. "This is my home," Clara answered, checking the rifle her husband once taught her to use. "Running only gives it to him faster." Eli was settled in the middle room, wrapped in blankets, told just enough to calm him without stoking terror. His solemn nods showed he was old enough to grasp more than she wanted. Close to midnight, Coulter caught movement out east. He watched from an upstairs window, body still as stone. "3 of them," he whispered, moving between the pen and the woodshed. "Doyle's leading, I'd know that hat anywhere." The formation told Coulter everything angles of fire-covered escape routes marked. This wasn't mischief. It was execution. He fired a single round into the dirt, the crack splitting the night. A warning shot, not a kill, letting them know they'd been seen and the house was ready. For a moment, silence. Then Doyle's shadow broke left, splitting his crew to circle the house. Coulter's jaw tightened. 2 peeling for the barn, Doyle holding center. They mean to split us. A streak of flame cut the dark, an arrow dipped in pitch, aimed for the barn roof. It fell short, hissing out in dirt, but the intent was clear. This wasn't about scaring Clara anymore. It was about burning her life to the ground. Eli's voice called from below, frightened awake from the shot. Clara slipped down, keeping her voice even though fear coiled in her chest. "Stay down, son. Keep to the pantry, just like we practiced. Don't move till Coulter or I come for you." Then came the sound of hooves riders rushing in from the west. At first, Coulter thought more of Boone's men timed to crush them from both sides. But then a whistle carried sharp and familiar Red Elk's call. Figures appeared between Doyle's crew and the house. Deputy Clay Mercer's voice rang out stronger than his usual drawl. "This is Deputy Mercer with territorial authority. Vacate this property or face arrest." It was the first time Clara had heard the law stand against Boone's reach. From the shadows, Doyle's voice rolled back smooth and cold. "You're overstepping, Deputy. We're tracking rustlers on Boone's range." Out of the dark stepped Reverend Amos Granger, shoulder-squared voice steady in a way his sermons rarely managed. "Enough lies. Marshal Rourke's ruling set the boundary. You cross it tonight." Then came others, neighboring ranchers' men who'd stayed quiet till now. They fanned out behind Mercer and the preacher guns at their sides, eyes sharp. The tide had shifted. Doyle measured the odds calm even in retreat. He wasn't a zealot, just a hired blade, and Boone's money wasn't worth dying for. His voice carried as he pulled back. Boone won't forgive this. Some fights ain't worth the blood they spill. His crew fell away with soldiers' discipline, covering one another as they vanished into the night. Doyle's last look toward the house was neither threat nor anger, only the nod of one professional to another, acknowledging the fight wasn't his to win. Morning showed the scars, trampled garden rows, livestock, scattered bullet holes punched in the barn boards. But in Clara's yard stood Mercer Granger, Red Elk, Whispering Rose, and the ranchers who had come at last. It wasn't the damage that mattered. It was the line they had drawn together against Boone's grip. Doyle and his men won't be back tonight, Coulter said quietly, scanning the horizon. And for the first time, Clara believed it. Deputy Clay Mercer spoke with a steadiness Clara Mae hadn't heard from him before. But Boone's not done. He's already pressing the territorial marshal to investigate so-called rustling on your land. From the ridge came Red Elk, returning from his dawn sweep of the country. He pointed north toward ridges nearly invisible to the untrained eye. They've set up watch posts out there, he said, keeping you under their glass, waiting for the chance to strike when it suits them. Inside the kitchen, Reverend Amos Granger nursed a cup of coffee, his usual unease in Clara's home giving way to a rare openness. The church council has voted to release emergency funds for families targeted by Boone's vengeance, he said, as though surprising himself with his own boldness. Word spread, and neighbors began to step forward. 3 ranchers pledged cattle to replace the ones slaughtered. He hits you today. He hits the rest of us tomorrow, growled old Sam Hartford, whose place had suffered Boone's tricks before. Time we remembered communities more than Sunday handshakes. Through it all, Coulter Hayes remained silent, listening, weighing planning. The drifter had become something more, an anchor, drawing scattered folks into coordinated defense, but Clara kept their eyes on reality. The mortgage comes due in 3 days, she said, her voice cutting through the hopeful talk. Virgil Tate's already told me no extensions, no half payments. He'll take the land straight to auction if I can't pay in full. Tate's cold certainty was Boone's last grip, the banker's ledger, his weapon. We'll drive the herd to Carson City, Coulter declared finally. Prices run higher there than here. It's our one chance to cover the note. The plan was fraught with risk. Moving stock thinned by drought across burned-out ranges meant leaving the homestead exposed. Boone's reach stretched long, and they all knew it. I'll ride with you, Hartford offered, surprising even himself. Others echoed his pledge, promising both riders for the drive and watchmen for the land left behind. Eli, wide-eyed, took it all in. I can help Ma guard the house, he said fiercely. The adults traded glances, half smiles, half worry, at the boy's brave innocence. By mid-morning, Whispering Rose arrived with remedies for trail sickness, smoked meat for the journey, and maps of waterholes only she and Red Elk knew. Her quiet hands steadied the flurry of noisy preparation. Clara moved among them with composed authority. For years she had borne this weight alone, but now her independence was tempered into leadership. What had been isolation was becoming something else, a circle of neighbors choosing to stand together. When dawn touched the hills, the drive began. Coulter and Red Elk scouted ahead while ranchers pushed the herds into line. Dust rose, horns clashed, and for once the land rang with cooperation instead of rivalry. Against odds, they reached Carson City. The stockyards yielded better than hoped enough to settle Tate's account and leave a little over for supplies. Clara laid the bills on his desk, crisp and exact. Virgil Tate's tight jaw betrayed the sting of disappointment, his auction notices already written, now worthless. Those dollars weren't just money. They were defiance made tangible. Boone's shadow shrank after these blows, though his empire still sprawled across the territory. The marshal's inquiry turned up no rustling, only troubling evidence of tampered boundaries, sparking fresh scrutiny across the county. Hank Doyle vanished from gallows reach altogether, his mercenary sense sniffing out a sinking ship. His absence was proof enough Boone's grip was loosening. Deputy Mercer found his voice strengthened, no longer a lone badge against corruption, but backed by townsfolk ready to speak. And Reverend Granger's sermons shifted too. Less fire and brimstone, more about justice here and now. A gospel tied to fences, mended, and neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. The churchyard grew into more than a place for Sunday hymns. It became the meeting ground for neighbors pooling their strength plans for shared irrigation ditches, bulk cattle sales, and ways to stand together when threats came riding. Eli. Cain thrived in that new circle of support. His boyhood widened by voices beyond his mother's. Red Elk taught him the ways of horse and trail, reading the land like a book. Whispering Rose passed on knowledge of roots, herbs, and the wild creatures of the mesas. Other ranch children, once distant, now became his companions, giving him laughter and play instead of endless solitude. Out along the line, the boundary stones still stood. Their strength came not just from a court ruling, but from neighbors' word of honor. For the first time, folks agreed that peace was stronger than Boone's hunger for more land. Winter came softer than most could remember. Early rains greened the pastures, gentle snow, laying a blanket without breaking fences or flooding draws. It felt like the land itself had bent toward balance after a season of fire and strife. Through it all, Coulter Hayes never left. What began as a drifter's stay stretched into months, his steady hands and guarded heart slowly weaving into the fabric of Clara Mae's ranch. Together, they turned loss into renewal. One evening when the sky burned red over the far peaks, Coulter found Clara by the corral ledger in hand, tallying the day's work. Golden light touched her face, showing the strength that had carried her through storms no woman should have faced alone. "I've been thinking on permanence," Coulter said, voice low, almost uncertain, a rare crack in his usual calm. A lifetime of drifting from job to job leaves a man hollow. Never thought I'd have reason to stay put. Clara closed the ledger, her eyes meeting his with the quiet understanding born of months spent side by side. They didn't need many words. Their bond had been forged in work defense and trust that grew like roots under stone. A man wonders about legacy. Coulter went on, rough hands sweeping toward the fields they'd fought to keep. Something that lasts after he's gone. More than wages, more than cattle. Something that carries on. The evening shadows stretched long as he stepped closer. His weathered face, worn by years of dust and loss, softened with a certainty he could no longer keep silent. "I'd trade 100 horses to leave a seed in you," he whispered, voice rough with feeling. It was both a vow and a plea, an unspoken hope that their fight had not only saved the land, but carved out a future worth claiming together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.